Anyway, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Mark Windham from Knoxville, Tennessee.
Thank you. I apologize for sitting down, although it's going to make the gentleman doing the videoing's job much easier because I won't be walking all across the room. I had to tell Jim that I didn't know if I was coming or not. 2.5 weeks ago, I was in the hospital with viral and bacterial pneumonia in both lungs. And so I still have it, but the doctors assured me that I'm not contagious. That was another thing that I didn't want to come if there was a possibility of that. So I'm stuck sitting in a chair, and I apologize for that, but that's the way it's going to be. What a wonderful presentation that was on arrangements for people like me who have gone through for decades of road shows and looking at arrangements and go, this thing is beautiful. And that piece of crap won? And that was because I had no idea of how points were awarded and all the different sections and things like that. By the way, when I first joined the Host and Rose Society in 1986, they don't have it now and I lament that. The Rose Show, in addition to the categories y'all talked about, had one called Anything Goes. And it was a magnificent section, and it was basically for spouses who worked with the extra flowers that, and it was usually the wives in the other class that would say, yeah, you can have this crap, I'm not using it. And that's what you worked with. But it was imaginative, and we had a lot of fun. And that's really what arrangements are about. But now we're going to talk about something I really know about, which is Rosette. And before we start, Jim, I don't know how, well, wait a minute here. Now, up and down. That's not doing it because over here, it's, let me get out of this. Now it's going to work. Oh, no, it didn't like, there we go. All right, we got it. That's the right one? I'm a college professor. No, I'm not. I haven't been one for 4 years. But I have handouts. They're all electronic. I can send them to Jim. My email address is based on my 2 oldest grandchildren. That's when I set it up. So it's Aiden Vera, 1011. That's their birth years. Had to be something I thought I would remember in old age. So Aiden Vera, 1011 @gmail.com. If you email me, it may take 3 or 4 days, but before I get to Effingham, Illinois to do this kind of stuff again next weekend, I will send them to you, yeah, if you're interested. So there's different types of things up here. All of them involve roses except one, and it is a fairly long handout on how to diagnose plant health problems in your flower gardens. So it does more than just roses, but it works perfectly well for roses too. But we're talking about Rosette. What an ugly beast. It's the only thing uglier is me. But what you are seeing here in these pictures is what I usually get from people. And I get a picture of one of these things, and all of those are pictures that I have received. And the first thing that I look at is go, we failed. Because if you have taking a picture of this in your garden, you have failed. And why is that? It's because microscopic mites carrying the virus have been ballooning for months or years to other plants in your garden. And this is why so many people will say, I can't get rid of it. Well, you can't get rid of it because you wait too dang long to take the plant out. So some of you are young. Maybe you have children or maybe you don't. Many of you are my age. so you probably have grandchildren. What I like to say, and I know it is blasphemy in this room, is that your rose bushes are not your grandchildren. I would never tell someone your grandchild's sick, well, you got to cull them out. I would never say that. On the other hand, I don't care if it is the only copy of your great-grandmother's rose that was on her grave until they cut it out. If it's got rosette, it needs to go. There is no such thing as a rose. It's sort of like, well, COVID was not really a good example, but if bubonic plague, Black Death, smallpox came out, and people unfortunately were dying, 1/3 of the population died, well, we would see this. It would be hard to get rid of all the bodies. It's probably not a good idea of keeping your deceased family member laying on a couch in your den until they can come get them, because you may get something from them. So that's what we need to think about with rosette. You got to get rid of it. And we're going to see in a few minutes why. But also knowing what is not rosette. After the Bell Rose Garden was put in at the University of Tennessee, and that was a magnificent gift by Mr. and Mrs. Sam Bell, what made it a marvelous gift was they not only gave the money for the garden, they set up an endowment to take care of it. I hate to use the word forever, but practically forever. They gave enough money for the endowment so that we didn't use all the interest each year, so that the endowment has kept growing to try to keep up with inflation over time. So, and that is the problem we've had in Shreveport. Rose societies will give something in honor of somebody that has passed away, but they don't give any money to take care of it 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road. But the Bells did that. So I had 2 interns, and they had a job. Their job was to come in the morning, and they had 10 minutes before I met with them to find any rose that had rosette and tag it. If they didn't do it, and I found it, they were fired. Now, that's what they knew, but that's not what was actually going to happen. So then I'd come through, and there'd be ribbons here, ribbons there, because they wanted their jobs. And then we would go through and talk about why this is not rosette. And so, and they learned more about that than they did through that about rosette than they did if we had just looked at pictures like the previous slide. So on this particular side, they would sometimes label basal breaks because we've got this thick stem coming up. It's got a lot of thorns on it. It's red in color. If you read the descriptions of rosette, we'd have to learn what is a basal break and what is truly rosette. Then you have Roundup damage. This or other herbicide damage. And whether you use it or not, I'm convinced that there are fairies and gnomes that go around spraying people's rose gardens, because I will walk in and it is obvious herbicide damage, and I am staring at a husband and wife that are both swearing, we didn't do it. Wasn't us. I haven't used anything, and you're looking at it and you're going, no, this is classical 2,4-D damage that came from Weed Be Gone. And no, they didn't do it. And then you look at them and say, do you have a lawn service that fertilizes your yard? Yes. Well, there you go. Okay, because they're going to put out a herbicide as well with that stuff. And if it's hot like it is in the South, and I know having been here in the summer in Ohio, you get hot as well, things can volatilize. It won't kill the plant, but it can certainly make it look different. Roundup damage always is pale yellow to white. It's not red. So this is one of the things which we can look at. Then you got healthy juvenile growth. that one would trick them up because they would be seeing there, juvenile growth is almost always red. There's this thing, the rosette's always red. No, it's not, but that's in the literature, so that's what they believe. It's a paper fact. All you have to do is have somebody hear something, and they wrote it down. I got one, but I had to proofread this last thing, and it said, well, Mark Windham said, and I was sitting there going, yeah, well, that guy's an idiot. Why you? And and then it's in there, and then somebody else will cite it, and somebody else will, and the next thing you know, it's a paper fact. There's no data behind it. So you have to be careful. And the last is a blind shoot. We don't like blind shoots, and we're going to talk about blind shoots some this afternoon with rose midge. So, but those all can be an issue. Rosette can also be found in wild roses. We've looked at 28 species of rosa, and many of them are native to the United States that are wild roses. Many of them are susceptible. This is one that is not native. This is Rosa multiflora, and where I'm from, it's also known as Seven Sisters. So it's been real fun being at the University of Tennessee because some of my stakeholders that I would work with were gardeners at historic homes where multiflora rose was planted when that 1700s era house was built because it was brought over from England and they planted it so that it is historically part of those gardens. So there I'm trying to maintain it and take care of it. Whereas in most rosettes, we got to get rid of this crap. And so the multiflora rose is certainly pronounced. I do not know for Ohio, but during the 1930s, during Roosevelt's New Deal and putting young men to work, there were 8 million multiflora rose bushes planted in Tennessee, 12 million in Virginia, and 7 million in Kentucky for erosion control. It wasn't that it was great for erosion control. They were imploring people who were starving and needed a job. So multiflora rose got scattered everywhere. And and I am sure that if you went through the historical records in the Buckeye State, it was as well. Although driving up, seeing all the soybean and cornfields, I have a hard time believing there's much here. But there probably is some. But one of the questions that I have gotten over the years is what can we do to clean up rosette in the rose industry? In fact, I had to deal with that with a case with Jackson Perkins this past year. Jackson Perkins did not have rosette. But let's look at what's going on here. 50 knockout roses around a Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A, the store, does not own the roses. They do not own the rose beds. They lease the property. The property comes landscaped. So they have no choice what's there. So all 50 roses were heavily symptomatic for rosette. Within sight, from the normal traditional wind directions, blowing towards this other business, was the largest garden center in Knoxville that had roses that you could see. Now, you can't see them in this picture, but you could see there was nothing to stop them from certified, weeks, and star roses. Now, I don't doubt at all that people who bought roses there, some of them were taking home roses with latent, that means no symptoms showing yet, infections of rosette. But they had those rose tags on them from those companies. So who got to blame? Okay, star, weeks, and certified. And they had absolutely nothing to do with it. You would be amazed at the number of blogs and things that go on where people are talking about rosette. Yeah, don't buy roses from Star because they're shipping rosette. I bought 4 rose bushes and 3 of them now have rosette. and none of the other roses in my garden do. And you're just sitting there rolling your eyes thinking, and where did you buy them? What was nearby where you bought them? Did you buy them mail order? Almost never is that the case. When you buy them mail order directly from store or whatever. So what I'm trying to tell you is, quit playing the blame game. There is probably no way that you will ever know where that thing came from. Now, on the other hand, we do know where it comes from. These are all cases in Knoxville. I'm not going to say which box store. This was for sale at a box store. There it was. And I'm sitting there, my wife's inside buying God knows what. And I'm out there looking at it going, ooh, look at this. Okay. And so I told her, she said, are you going to tell the garden manager? I said, no, I know him. He was in plumbing 2 weeks ago. And I said, I'm going to come back in 2 days and see if it's still here. Came back in 2 days and it was gone. Did they find it and remove it? I doubt it. Or did someone buy it and take it home? Okay. And you say, well, why didn't you tell them? Well, is anybody in here a physician? You are. That's what I thought. Okay. When you walk down the street, let's say you're in Delaware, Ohio, and you walk down the street, and you see someone like me coming the other way who's obese, do you stop them and say, sir, you're fat? Do you know if you don't get this under control, you're going to have trouble? Do you stop people you don't know until? You don't do that. Well, you see, that's what the same thing here with Rosette. Yeah, I see it, but that doesn't mean I'm going to stop. Now, if they ask me, I'm happy to help them, okay? But you don't just, that is not a way to make friends. And so you would understand, you don't do that, do you? No. Okay, well, that makes perfect sense to me. This other box store at the bottom, they wasn't for sale. Once again, this was a store. They did not own the roses out front, but the roses were separated by an iron fence, plenty of air moving in between them, and the roses were on the other side of the fence. I had to be careful with these pictures to make sure that the stores were not identified. Okay? But there's no doubt that it was going home. So when you go to buy roses, look around. Ask yourself, what is that over there? And if you go, ooh, that could be Rosette, maybe it's time to buy somewhere else. Okay? And not take it home. Now, we call it rosette virus. We've known about this. This has been a disease. It was first reported in 1938 in the western United States and western Canada. That was the first report of it. One of those 5 western states was California, and I still have California Rosarians that I hear stand up and say, we've never had Rosette. And I'm sitting there thinking, you're one of the 5 original states. But of course, California is real big. That's very impressive. Connecticut is the size of a postage stamp, and those people get offended when I say that, but it's true. Rhode Island and Delaware are even worse. But these 2 gentlemen nailed the door shut that it is a virus. And we're going to call it Rosette virus. But you need to know that the nerds with the International Committee or Taxonomy of Viruses have changed the name to Amerivirus rosea. So in the future, if you keep up with literature coming out, you may see, what the heck is this? Amerivirus rosea. And I imagine it's little nerds like those in the bottom picture that are sitting around with nothing better to do than to change the name of something we've known and used for years to something else. But if they don't do this, what do they have to do for a job? So I am sympathetic for that reason. And as far as Rosette is concerned, well, it's here. It's us. I love sending this map to people when they ask me, is it native to North America? And you send them this map and say, what do you think? And so yes, it is native to North America, but it was not in the eastern United States defined as the Mississippi River and eastward. That has been something that has happened since 1970. And it is continuing to move, and it has spread, and I've watched a lot of the spread happen. And it was done mainly through interstate movement of roses, and also by inadvertent movement. You say inadvertent movement of roses? Yeah, well, the mites can move, and they can be on other things. They can't survive more than 5 days. But how far can a plant move in 5 days? So it can move a long way. And that's what we're talking about. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Has anybody in here not seen this mite before? I mean, you've seen pictures. We'll actually see it move in a minute. But this is an aerified mite. When I was a little boy, my mama would love to take naps in the afternoon. She'd say, go get your fishing poles after lunch and go fishing. I don't care where you go, just go. And she was going to take a nap. And she had these white opaque blinds that she pulled down, and occasionally a pinhole would appear in them. And we don't know who did that. And a sunbeam would come through it, and you could see dust particles when they floated through that little sunbeam of light, but then you couldn't see them anymore when they got out. That's the size of these mites. Those dust particles are the same size as these aerified mites. So there are millions to billions in the summer blowing in the air. You don't know it. Jim may not even know it, but they're there. And you know, and when you breathe in, you breathe them in and breathe them out. But they are there along with mold spores, bacteria, pollen, and other things. But the problem here is that we have one that is a native mite to North America. It is found from Miami to the northern provinces of Canada, from the Pacific to the Atlantic, and it is called Phyllocoptes fructiphilus, which is the rose aerified mite. It doesn't cause any damage to the plant, so we don't care about it. No one else cared about it either until we discovered that it vectors this virus. And now the data is showing that the virus may even replicate inside the mite. So that just brings it to a new level of transmission ability, since the thing can move in the mite and reproduce there. So this is what the mite really looks like with a scanning electron micrograph. They love to hide in niches. They're also called the niche mite. So they get down in microscopic niches at the base of shoots and sepals and things like that, where our pesticides, even with wetting agents, have a hard time getting at. So they're difficult. The females are banana-shaped. The eggs are white, and we'll see that again in just a minute, but we're not going to spend much time on these videos. So we'll watch this one first. If it works, I don't know if it's going to work in this. Well, we'll see it on another one. But, and that's okay. But they're banana-shaped, and they're going to, well, I'm not going to stand up. Pretend like you're a mite. You've got 4 legs right up at the top of your head. You have no eyes. You can't see. You have no nose. You can't smell. So, but what you can do, and I find this to be remarkable of them, is that they can raise them up on their tail or butt bone if they had one, and they raise up like this, and they secrete a drop of a substance that glues them to the substrate. So now they're standing up like this, and they got their 4 little feet that are very high, legs that are very hairy, and they're going around like this, like sails. And just when the wind currents, remember they're microscopic, so a wind current we can't feel is hurricane strength to them, okay? So they're being about to be pulled in two, and then they secrete another substance that dissolves the sticky substance instantly, and they shoot off like a cork out of a pop gun. Now they're in the air. and they will float until they land on something. And then with their stylettes, they have 5 stylettes, they poke around, and if it's not a rose, they do it again. And they'll do it again multiple times a day until they either find a host or die, and they'll be dead in about 5 days. Can they be found in the winter? Yes, in West Virginia they found Phyllocopsis fructiphilus on snowflakes. So yes, they can be found in the winter. So, so this is what we're facing here. Now, is there as many of them in the winter as there is in July? No. But that doesn't mean that they're not there. But most movement of rosette and mites carrying the virus has been interstate shipment of roses. Okay? And so this is a reason to buy local. There are reasons maybe not if you got midge. We'll talk about that this afternoon. But this cartoon tries to emphasize that. It's just a matter of these things just drifting in air currents. We call it ballooning. When your 4-year-old lets go of their helium balloon and they didn't mean to, and they'll be there crying, come back, come back. They have no control of that balloon. That balloon has no control either. That's the way the mite is. So it's floating in the air, ballooning, but it has no control where it lands. And we're going to just skip that. But I want you to understand it's a jungle out there. They're not the only mites on rose bushes. So just because, and thank God we got diagnostic clinics to say it's got symptoms, it's got mites, or was it fructiphilus? Well, we didn't check. Well, you have to understand there's other mites on there. And some of these mites, such as Aromyces, as their populations build up, Phyllocopsis populations go down. So it's a possibility that one day we may want to try to exploit that as a biological control. We're nowhere near that at the moment. There's so little known about these other mites. But here's the key. And this is why I was so emphasizing that thing at the beginning about leaving that rosette or that witch's broom in your garden. The mite populations on that witch's broom are 40 to 80. We've had it as many as 120 times higher, higher than it is on foliage of the same plant that is not symptomatic. Now I was working to try to figure out why, but I don't do that anymore. But the bottom line is, what you are leaving when you leave that chute there for any period of time is leaving a source that is just spewing mites at an incredible number in a very short period of time all over your garden. So do you understand how important it is, and we're going to look at it, how important it is to get rid of that thing at the beginning, because at the beginning the mite populations are not high and they are not ballooning. So they have to reach critical mass before they start to bloom. And so this is why I emphasize wherever I go, early detection, quick action, and be vigilant. And I'll explain that. Those interns, we were vigilant. 5 days a week we're inspecting. They didn't work Saturday and Sunday. I did, but I didn't want to work any longer than I had to, so I didn't go look at those roses on Saturday and Sunday. But 5 days a week they were looking. Now, if we saw anything that I thought after I walked through there with them that was rosette, that they had tagged, was rosette, we eliminated the bush. And then I had about 50 bushes in 3-gallon containers that we would dig that bush up and set a new rose right in the place. And I heard the director of the garden many times answer questions, say, no, we've never had a case of rosette in the garden. But you see, we weren't being mean by telling her that. We were interested to see if we could pull it off. Okay? So what happened was, we wound up replacing about 5% of the roses in the garden each year, because there was a massive, right across the Tennessee River from the gardens, was a massive cliff that was choked full of symptomatic multiflora rose that I had no control over. And so we were facing it, but she never knew. And that was because we wanted to see if we could pull that off. And we did, also because I'm cruel and mean. I've never claimed to be a nice guy. And so we did. Then I got too busy on my research on Rosette, and I had to give supervision of the garden up. And it came in, and she called me and said, we've lost half our plants. They were not doing what we were doing on aggressive inspection. And so I had to go and say, okay, I need to do a confession. And, and I told her, I said, well, why hadn't you told me this? I said, we were trying to see how long we could get away with it. And so that is the key. So what do? There it is. Rosette. Thickened stem. Look at that incredible thorniness. The thorns are more numerous than they should be. And you say, well, some roses are very thorny. Well, I know they're prickles, but I'm from Tennessee, and people pronounce things differently. And so some people get embarrassed at the way they pronounce things, so we'll call them thorns. And so they would, you look at that, the thorns are often longer, they may be elastic. You're not comparing them to a rose of a different cultivar. You're comparing it to stems the same age on the same bush that are not symptomatic. And if you see an increased thorniness that way, you need to watch out. If the stems are thicker, you need to watch out. If the leaves are strapped, and by strap, my daddy had one hanging in the bathroom. He never spanked my brothers or I, no matter how much we deserved it with that strap, but he threatened us with it many, many times. So I know what a razor strap looks like. For those who are too young, they're long pieces of leather, and they're, long, about 30 inches long, and they're only about this wide. So strap means an unusually long, thin leaf. That is a primary symptom of rosette on young foliage. And so if you have red stems, thickened stems, enhanced thorniness, strapped leaves, you're probably dealing, I would say there's a 90% chance you're dealing with rosette. If you have one of those symptoms, don't do anything. If you have two of those symptoms, all your bells are going off. If you have 3 or 4 of those symptoms, it's gone. And it's not, I don't care if you got a rose show coming up in 3 weeks and that thing has magnificent buds on it. Get it out now. I cannot emphasize that enough. That takes discipline. Okay? Rosarians are not known for discipline when it comes to getting rid of roses or to saying, my beds are full, I don't want any new ones. Have you ever met a rosarian that says that? Okay. I have met hundreds that should. Okay? Because they're not going to take something out. They're going to crowd something else in. And what happens then? Well, disease goes amok. But here's the whole point on this, is you've got to be constantly vigilant, because if you don't, it will be there, and bad things will happen. Truthfully, how many of you saw the leopard? Okay. So see, you could be standing at that tree. You could be standing at that tree, and trouble is about to happen. Okay. Because you were not vigilant, and you're looking, and there is the leopard. At the Nashville airport, this was a bed of knockout roses, and Alan, my brother Alan, who was my extension counterpart, we were hired at the same time. Both departments talked about how much they interacted with each other and how much they partnered with each other on things. Neither department knew that they had hired the other one. So he was my extension counterpart. And so there it is. One plant. We counted 700 bushes, we think. Somewhere between 650 and 700 bushes in this massive bed of overcrowded knockout roses. And one plant. So did we tell anybody? No, we said, we're going to see what happens here. In 3 years, there were no roses left. Over 80% of them had rosette and had to be removed. And this will bring a good place up to say it. People will say knockout roses are more susceptible than other roses. Our research show it is not. What it is, in Tennessee at least, until a few years ago when other things have come out, that a rose with knockout in its name was 83% of all roses sold in the state. Now don't think it's people like you. You are such a minor part of the rose industry. They act like you're important, but you're not. Knockouts, drift roses, and things like that used in landscape plantings, those guys don't buy 5 roses a year. They buy thousands. So, so that's just the way, but you have to understand where you are in the universe. And I did this at a number of sites where we would go in and use rose plantings at commercial sites. This is a large commercial building. And all that this is showing is that over time, when rosette first showed up, it had a clump distribution, and over time it became more random, and that is because so many of them were becoming infected that clumps began to become random points as the way that it would show up in the models. So spread is there. Now, I have my wife, if she was here, she'd be looking at this side saying, don't you do it, okay? But I'm going to do it because I think it's important. There used to be a gentleman in Washington who was talking about the COVID virus, and he was criticized because his story kept changing. Dr. Fauci, if you remember him.
Sure.
And people would talk about, very conservative people would say, the man is criminal, he won't tell the truth, he keeps changing his story. Well, when we started working with Rosette, we were telling people that when you have a plant with it, you need to bag it up before you cut it to keep mites from escaping off the bush until you remove it. And that was the standard issue. It got written up in many publications. God knows how many times my picture was used in things, with the bag on it like that. But then data came out, and other labs looked at the data and tested it themselves. You've got 48 hours after you cut that bush before the mites start to fall off. So unless you're going to cut it and just leave it there for 2 days, you don't have to bag it. So now our story has changed because we learned something new. And when you learn something new, you make your recommendations based on the most current knowledge that you have. The data for COVID was changing so fast that, of course, Dr. Fauci's story was changing. Okay? But conservatives did not want to hear that. And I am one. But they did not want to hear that. But I understood what was going on with him because as a scientist, data changes quickly, especially on things that are considered an immediate threat where there's a tremendous amount of work going on. So things with Rosette changed. One thing that we did learn, though, and this is used by the Dallas Botanical Garden to this day, they had eliminated roses, but you can put a barrier around your rose gardens. I don't recommend what we used. We needed something cheap and we needed something fast that grew fast. So we put miscanthus around our roses as a barrier because the mites only go after what? Rosa species. And what we found was that we could significantly reduce the movement of rosette in the gardens if there was a barrier. around them. Now, the problem that we have with our buildings where we're doing that is that we had to bring weather data in, things measuring air currents, because we have all these cyclone air currents that are just not blowing like they are in a case like this. But we couldn't eliminate it, but we could really knock it down. Now, where is this important? If you live in an area where you have neighborhoods or woods nearby that are choke full of multiflora rose, you may need to put a barrier. The closer the barrier is to your roses, the more effective it will be, because it's sort of like air going over an airplane wing. Okay? So this is something that can be useful. There are miticides. We'll talk more about this afternoon, not as miticides. But there are 4 commercial miticides that require a commercial license that are used that will be very effective, sprayed every 3 weeks, preventing mites from building on your roses. We have one that has a homeowner label of those 4, bififerin. It is sold in over 200 products. So you can get it. Those 2 pictures came from Walmart.com. Okay, so you can get it. I would not recommend it unless you've had a problem in the past. Because why? It's the only thing we have for homeowners. So we are worried about, as you can imagine, a lack of sensitivity developing in mite populations due to the miticide. But some people do have to use it. Resistance. Not going to hit this hard at the beginning. This is an old study when we first started. We looked at almost 1,500 rose cultivars and rose lines in replicated trials. Some years I would have as many as 8,000 rose bushes that I had to work with. And you say, well, that sounds like fun. No. You go through and take data on them each month and have to collect samples out of all those 8,000 roses and run virus titer on them. And we'll see how fun you think it is. So this is what we had to do. What we did find, though, that 2% of the things we tested were resistant. And by resistant, that meant the symptom-free or minimum symptoms and viral positive. This is something you have to understand. Entomologists, God help their ignorant souls, will call a plant resistant to an insect if the insect doesn't feed on it. Okay? And that makes sense. But in the case of disease, we have another issue. We can have plants that have no symptoms but carry the virus. So it looks resistant to everybody else, but it could still be a host that mites could pick the virus up and spread it around. So we have to watch for that kind of thing. Here are some Rosette data that if they're in black and bold, that meant there is a 95% probability, and we're always dealing in probability and statistics, that they do not have the virus and they are not symptomatic after being inoculated with the virus for 3 years straight, okay, in the field. I'm a firm believer of in the field versus in the greenhouse or in the growth chamber. And if they are not in bold, there is a 1 in 10 chance that we're wrong. So that meant that they have a 90% probability of being resistant. So that the thing works. But there's something you have to understand here. Don't go, ooh, I got that one. You see, here's the thing, what we found out. Those that are on the list there, practically all of them, we had multiple accessions from different places. And we had no species that every accession was resistant. So what that means is, just like in this room, Jim, if a disease went through this room, well, let's just say a bad flu virus went through this room, some of us would be deathly ill, and some of us would barely get a sniffle. okay? And we wouldn't think anything about it. Well, it's true in rose populations as well. So just because a species is resistant doesn't mean they all are. It means the one that was tested was. Because we now know that it's that way. But here's some cultivars. These were resistant to rose rosette. The ones in bold are the ones that are more, and you say, well, these ain't ones I want in my garden, necessarily. And some of them you might have. But this is the interesting list. And by the way, Mary, who is Typhoid Mary, we've all heard that term, was a real person. Her story is actually rather sad, but she's not blameless either, okay? So you can go online and Google her name and you can read about it and you can go, wow, damn, okay? But the bottom line is this. These are roses here. And once again, with those rose species, that's not the species, that's these particular accessions, okay? That were symptom-free, but they carried the virus in a low level. And one of the studies that got stopped when I retired was we were looking to see if the mites could pick them up, okay? When I was hired at the University of Tennessee, counting all the states around Tennessee, we're a long, narrow state, so that's a lot of states. There were 9.5 ornamental plant pathologists in Tennessee and in the states around it. When Alan and I retired 4 years ago, that left 3. They're not being hired, and the reason being is most grant money goes for food and fiber crops, and ornamentals is not seen as a food or fiber crop. So it is harder to get funding. Now, we were very blessed with rose rosette, but the bottom line, though, is it's very difficult for ornamental pathologists or entomologists to get tenure, and universities hate that happening. And and you sit there and you go, well, I don't know if I believe in tenure or not. Let me explain something to you. There are 2 additional forms that have to be filled out to fire a tenured professor with cause at the University of Tennessee. It takes approximately 20 minutes to fill them out. They are not going to fire anyone unless they have a good reason. If they have a good reason, tenure will protect you for 20 minutes. So all this bullshit you see about, they don't do anything. I sat at McDonald's one morning at 7 o'clock in the morning because I had a guest lecture to give at another university at 8:15. And I was listening to 2 men saying, wish I was a college professor. They'll show up at 11, go to lunch at 12, and leave for a cocktail party at 2. And I'm sitting there thinking I'm probably going to get home about midnight tonight. And, but that's just the way life is in the slow lane. But, because we need to end this, the bottom line is we are developing, we have resistance, we've been developing it, we now know, this is an old slide, we now know that we have not just QTLs and resistant loci on 5 chromosomes. Chromosome 5 is most important, but we now know where those genes are located. And so this makes manipulation much easier. But roses are difficult. We are diploid organisms. That means we have a pair of chromosomes. Most of the roses you grow are tetraploid and hexaploid, which means they have 4 to 6 sets of chromosomes. So now, if we get more copies of these resistant genes, are they more resistant? This is the kind of work that is going on now. But we know, thank God, from these papers where they are at. There is a new thing that I was part of, but I am not now, in which we are incorporating resistance to rose rosette along with Wisconsin, Riverside, and University of Minnesota, who are the black spot people. We are incorporating resistance of black spot and rose rosette into roses that you want in your garden. Now, will I see that in my lifetime? I don't know. Because traditionally, when a rose company gets a new rose, it is many years of bulking it up and doing their own testing for commercial reasons before it comes onto the market. But they are coming. And so one day, spraying for black spot, worrying about rose rosette will be a thing of the past. And I'm very excited about that. So this is part of that, okay? As I told them last night, you can see some pictures here. We planted 1,400 roses, put down drip irrigation and mulch in one day. If you have enough volunteers, even a pharaoh can build a pyramid, although those were not volunteers, okay? Sometimes our volunteers wonder if they are actually volunteers. So, we're putting out demonstrations across the country. One of them is here in Columbus. I don't know what its status is now. I've been too sick, so I wasn't able to make that phone call, but I'm going to find out and let Jim know so that he can make a report to y'all about that. But one of the demonstration gardens is supposed to be on Ohio State property. And so and she's doing research on management as well. So y'all are now part of the group. And so, which means my daddy was wrong, which is what I want to end with. My daddy got his PhD at Michigan State. One day, he was watching with me when I was about 10, a PhD in horticulture. We're watching Michigan and Ohio State play, two teams he does not like. And he's sitting there and he looked at me and he tells me all the evils of Wolverines. Okay, how they're not friendly, they're not nice. And and on and on and on. And then he looks at me and he says, Mark, do you know what a Buckeye is? And I said, no, sir. He says, it is a hairless nut of no economic value. Okay. So that has been, but I have learned on previous trips to Ohio dealing with rosarians, and we are about to stop. When I started in Rose Rosette, it was just me. And as far as trying to get rid of it, there were biological control projects, but this is the way I felt. But now there are so many people working on it, the squirrel has grown bigger and has a lot more muscles. So this is the way it is. Thank you so much. I've gone over time by a few minutes, but I do appreciate so much the invitation to come. I wish my wife was here. It's her birthday, but she is back at the motel because something happened on this trip and her knee is 3 times the size it should be, and she's in a lot of pain. So she's back propping it up, but I'm hoping she'll show up sometime before it's time to go. But I'm retired now. I'm not in. Oh, they call me and ask stuff, but I'm not out there taking those stupid virus samples anymore. And so I'm not doing that. I thought life was going to be fun. No, I'm Karen's yard boy. For every job I get done, she assigns 2 more. Pity me. And with that, I'm done. Thank you very much.